Well, largely we were into writing about freedom of information, or lack of it. Particularly when you're talking about a Senate standing committee that represents the people who elect the government, asking questions of the Howard government in those days, John Faulkner being the chair, asking questions which were not answered through freedom of information. So we use this as one particular case study to illustrate that freedom of information is really not that at all. It's freedom from information.
Yeah, definitely.
No, I worked with Tony Kevin. I'd heard him on Late Night Live with Philip Adams, and I was shocked by how much he revealed in that interview and how much was not out there in the mainstream media about the SIEV X, given that 350 people drowned of a boat that was 450 odd, that was overloaded with the deliberate point for it to sink. And they hoped they would have it sink in an international shipping lane so that they would pick people up, but it went beyond that, and so on the way to Christmas Island, so it sank where there weren't many boats to rescue. And there were some allegations that in fact a Navy vessel, whether it was in Australian waters, whether it was the Australian Navy or the Indonesian Navy, we don't know, but it sailed up, shone some spotlights around and then sailed off. That could have been a hallucination for someone who'd been in the water for that long, but whatever the case was just terrible. And the most alarming aspect was the Senate Standing Committee was unable to get information from various departments like DFAT, which was a freedom of information demand, which is quite deserving of that information being disclosed.
Yeah. Do you know of any kind of news organisations that have covered it at all? Did you know any at all?
No, that was the point of doing the story also, in that there weren't anyone except Philip Adams interviewing Tony Kevin. And Tony Kevin had made the point that he had written about it a lot in the Australian and the Sydney Morning Herald, I think, but Marg Hutton's website was there, but there was just very little in the mainstream media, and journalists just weren't taking up the story, whereas Tony Kevin was writing the stories himself. Yes, I do. There seems to be a lack of transparency. That seems to be absolutely clear. Not that Labor was that transparent either, but there certainly seems to be less transparency than there was with Labor, and we're perhaps back to the secrecy of Howard's time, which was revealed in the SIEV X inquiry. The Standing Committee was unable to get information, despite the fact that the Minister's Office and various other departments were getting regular updates about the SIEV X movements. And we certainly saw no transparency about the detention centres as well in Manus Island and Nauru. Through Labor and now with the current government was the same story. So I think that's business as usual. Transparency, lack of transparency as usual as well. I've written here, we know now that Abu Quessy, the people smuggler mentioned in the official government cable supplied to the PST, was a sting operative whose activities were to discredit and ultimately destroy the people smuggling industry. Well, why not have some more operations like that if we're that determined to stop the boats? Going on with the quote, a DFAT cable sent to 3 senior defence personnel at the time of the sinking identified SIEV X as the Quessy vessel. The cable also noted that people had refused to board the boat. 10 P11, that's people, 10 people refused to embark due to the size of the vessel. Says it all, doesn't it? And you have the Australian Federal Police in there recruiting people smugglers to try to have control over the whole situation. They knew when the vessel was leaving, when it was being loaded, when it was likely to sink. The Prime Minister's office was being informed of that. Well, it's never been proper, simply because you don't know if someone's illegal until such time as their credentials are checked. And if they're escaping terrible situations, well, they're likely to be genuine refugees. And the people who are illegal are those who are overstaying their visas while here in Australia, many of them from the United Kingdom. They're the illegal ones, and it's improper to use that term. And I think it's improper to continue to give that term oxygen, whether it's a quote from someone who's, you know, a conservative politician or some commentator who uses that. They just shouldn't be given the oxygen to allow that discourse to continue, because it's simply wrong.
Yeah.
Much of the evidence from the 2002 Senate Select Committee inquiry into a certain maritime incident, Madeline, must be viewed as inconclusive, because we don't have the full picture. The information was withheld. It's kept secret, so we don't know how much information is now secret, because it's part of the culture of the media that they feel they need to cite legitimate, verifiable sources, so they cite each other, whereas they won't cite someone like Tony Kevin because he's a conspiracy theorist or something, when in fact he's not. He's a very reliable and verifiable source. And Marg Hutton as well, but her site's just a blog site, so we won't cite that. So this is very much the case with media across a range of big news stories, and they continue to cite government sources as being reliable, when in fact government sources are the ones producing the spin and the lies in many cases. And so that is a real problem with the media, and I'm not quite sure how to get around it except to build blogs like Marg Hutton did, and continue to generate her own impeccable record and continue to try to get traction with her own journalism, if you like. I consider that to be journalism. It's verifiable, it's well done, it's well written, and same with Tony Kevin. He actually writes pieces, but it's often put in an opinion section. So it's immediately almost discredited as opinion, rather than
if it's
absolute
published.
News. Yeah, if it's published, yeah. And so that's a shame too. And to be interviewed by, say, Philip Adams on Late Night Live, who listens to it?
Yeah.
It's a problem with the mainstream news media.